Went well. Yeah, better than the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as training.
Oh, you got four? Okay, I was waiting for Mike. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. We're going to start with a pledge of allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. All right, we're going to start off with citizen concerns. Teaming with concerned citizens, we're going to move on to the approval of the agenda. I'll move that.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes 5-0. Anyone opposed? Moving on to the consent agenda. Items 3 through 8 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 3, the approval of the minutes of the February 19th, 2019 meeting. Item 4, approval of claims. Item 5, board administration. A, approval of lifting tax suspension for VS. And B, approval of lifting tax suspension for TS. 6, county auditor, received the appointment of Lance Heyman to the Morgan Township trustees. Number 7, county treasurer, receive revocation of appointment. Item 8 from human resources, approval of memorandum of personnel transactions.
I move approval of consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by DeWitt, second by Taylor to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion on those items? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes 5-0. Moving on to item 9, building services. Approval of Dorothy Pico Nature Center HVAC and roof improvement project, change order number 1, hydronic system cleaning, geothermal treatment, chemical, glycol replacement, hydronic and condensate piping.
Kenny Schmitz, Building Services Director. As we've been working on the project at the Dorothy Pico Nature Center, the contractors brought to our attention their concern with the condition of the hydronic system or the geothermal system water. After receiving that concern, I enlisted the services of ICI. They do water testing in our county buildings for our hydronic systems and for our HVAC chiller systems and do testing. I wanted an external source to do that so no one that was involved with the project would have any influence over the results. ICI did do the testing. They pull samples, and they do have have a separate laboratory that conducts the actual test for them, and then they provide the results back to the county. We completed that. ICI recommended that the system water be replaced, the system be flushed, and the system be cleaned out with a chemical cleaning process, and then then replace all the glycol in the system. I requested pricing from ICI on the cleaning chemicals and the glycol. They provided costs for the cleaning chemicals and the inhibitor that's to be installed after the system has been flushed and cleaned out. They declined to provide prices for labor of cleaning the system or replacing the glycol, citing that we could do it locally cheaper than what they could provide those services. We enlisted the services of Global Engineering as the general contractor to give us costs on flushing that system, which is a kind of a difficult process. The system has to be basically has to have chemical put in it, chemical installed in it. It has to be run for 24 hours, flushed out, and the process basically completed 3 different times to get the whole system out there at Dorothy Pico. So Global Engineering provided us costs to do that. So the costs we have to date for those are Innovational Concepts, $2,055 plus shipping and handling for the cleaning, chemicals, and the inhibitor. Global Engineering and Construction, $27,118. And so a change order total for a change order total of number 1 would be $29,173. We did have a contingency fee on this project that was approved by the board early on of $32,445. When we include the costs we're asking approval on today we go over the threshold of the total project that was provided by the board or granted by the board previously. The total exceed cost previously was $723,595. We're now asking the board to increase that total to $725,514. That would be an increase of $1,919. And as you look at my agenda item for today under action required and proposed motion, there is a typo in there. It's asking to increase the contingency by $1,119. The typo is that should be $1,919. However, the total project funding increase to $725,514 is correct. That's the amount we are currently asking the board to approve. Are there any questions that I can try to answer for you?
What was missing from the water? Glycol amount, is it?
Originally, before the project started, the glycol percentage would have needed to be increased anyway.
Okay.
We anticipated that originally. What we did not anticipate is
How
that
much?
we didn't anticipate that it would have to be completely removed and replaced. As part of the dirty water and aged glycol in the system, they recommended replacing it.
What's the typical lifespan on that?
I believe the typical lifespan, Terry, you can correct me, 10 years, I believe.
Yeah, we're regulated with CMBA Architects. Yeah, the system has outlived its normal lifespan, let's put it that way. And I don't know that there's any, to me, there's not a choice. I mean, it pretty much has to be replaced with the testing results that we got.
By increasing this contingency, is it instantly used, and so we don't have a contingency going forward?
That is correct.
Do we need one?
Do we still, we still have to have a motion approving change orders, though, do we not? I mean, as a board,
We do.
we have to approve those, so.
Yes, the only problem we may run into, which we did run into on this project earlier already, is that if we don't have a contingency and we need to pull the trigger on something right away, it will be difficult for us to do that.
I mean, other than calling 3 of us and getting permission and then voting on it later.
And if that's an option, I'm good with that.
Is that an option, or, I mean, I know with claims.
I don't think-
it's okay, but I don't know if
I don't know,
that's.
that's what the
I
city
don't
did.
think that's an option.
What the precedents?
I'm sorry, Joshua, what did you say?
I said I don't think that's a good option.
With Joshua's comments, I would ask the board to now provide an additional contingency fee.
Is 5,000 enough?
I'd say 10. Terry, you have a recommendation?
Just to avoid coming back for increases, that probably be wise.
And we
Hopefully
still would
we
have to
don't
come
need it,
back for
but-
approval on the change order.
I'd support that.
Which you don't have that on the agenda today, so. I mean, you could come back next week, you could add that 10,000, and you'd have that out there going
Sure.
forward, but
Well, can't you make the motion to amend that amount? Well, it's on the agenda as an item, the dollar amount could change.
well, the change order, to approve a change order, I don't think that it's on the agenda to
Isn't the contingency built in
change the
there?
contingency
Okay,
amount.
Change order for the whole project.
that says, project contingency by 1190, right down there at the bottom. They just amend that amount.
Which, so what's on this sheet is the agenda?
Oh, okay. Oh, I get you.
I can come back next week and ask for that
If we
contingency.
approve the change order, then we can work on the contingency fund next week.
Well, what are we funding the contingency? Where would that be coming from, Dennis? 10,000? What's that?
Capital projects.
Capital projects. So could you not just approve the change orders using all but 10,000 of the contingency funds and the rest of that coming through capital projects? And then you don't have to come back at all and it leaves 10,000 the contingency?
Yeah.
There you go. So I will move the approval of, do we have to move each individual change order then? Or just,
The only thing that's on the agenda is change order number 1.
okay. So I will move change order number 1 using funding from capital projects, CIP funding,
Well, what's on the,
and all except for 10,000 of contingency funds that were set aside for this project. So,
It's all covered from CIP.
okay,
yes.
I think you're moving that, except for the 10,000, it's still 11 contingency, and drawing it from CIP funds, is that right?
yes.
So that there would not be a reason to come back next year.
Is that good with you, Joshua?
That should work.
Second.
So motion by Raddick, second by Taylor. Any other discussion on this item? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to secondary roads, receive and consider bids for project number L-B D156-73-97. Thank you.
One of our 5 bids was delivered this morning. The contractor wasn't able to get through with the weather conditions that we had. I recommend we go ahead and open the bid and allow him to be included with the rest of them. The board doesn't have any objections.
No objection from me.
bid is from Peterson Construction Incorporated. Bid bond is included. Total bid price, $196,086.50. 196,086.50. Next bid is from Nelson and Rock Contracting. Proper bid bond is included. Bid price, $163,803. 163,803. Next bid is from Dixon Construction. Bid bond is included. Bid price, $183,848.50. 183,848.50. Our next bid is from L.A. Carlson Contracting. Bid bond again included. Total bid price, $152,697.50. 152,697.50. Our final bid is from Midwest Contracting.
Do I hear 140?
No. Bid bond is included. You got your wish.
Oh,
$146,739.
I'll have to do that more often.
Yeah. Pardon me?
I said I'm going to have to do that more often.
Yeah. With that gap, I don't think we got any issues. I recommend award of the bid to
Midwest Contracting.
Midwest Contracting. I just want to get their location, Marshall, Minnesota.
I will move that.
I'll second, as long as it's not a shell company of Mr. Raddick's.
I don't think there's any business relationship there, so.
You don't need any time to look and see it because it is so far below the engineer's estimate.
What we allowed in this project was a cast in place and a precast option. Typically, precast can come in cheaper than cast in place. I think cast in place is a better product in most conditions. If we were under a paved road, you'd probably see me insisting on cast in place. In this case, we're out on a gravel road. The precast is an adequate product under a relatively shallow fill in this case.
So the estimate here was for cast in place.
That is correct, yes.
Oh, this was precast.
This is a precast option, and we're satisfied with that option. We did allow it on the plans, and that is a good bid.
I don't object to them being below the engineer's estimate, but when they're all.
Yeah, when you see that big a gap, but all of the contractors did choose to bid the precast option.
Okay, that was that. Thank you.
Well, I think there's precast made right south of Marshall. But, motion by Raddick, second by Ung. Any further discussion on the item?
There's two companies that make them in the area, Sumcast out of South Dakota, and then Hancock
Hancock, yeah.
Concrete Products. So,
They're the one in Minnesota.
yep.
Yeah. All right, no other discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes 5-0. Moving on to item 11. Thank you. Board of Supervisors, consider motion to the commitment of future secondary road levy generated by CF Industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this is a way to continue our discussion from a previous week in which we looked at the potential this year, budget year, of dedicating a portion of revenue to gravel roads. This is something that we've heard, I think, time and time again over the last 4 years. And I think if we don't have a plan in place, then it's something that sort of gets kicked down the road. And so we'll either fail to plan or we'll plan to fail in this area. So what this does is recommends that the County Board and Secondary Road Department set a goal to dedicate future property tax revenue generated by CF Industries valuation and basically set it aside for gravel purchases. I won't go into the whole history because I think we've done that time and again here as far as inflation and the cost of gravel, as well as the fact that we're no longer at that 5 to 6 inch base. We're basically spot graveling at this point. If you look at the back side of the packet, it shows what we would need to levy to meet the minimum as we did this year, or of course we lose a dollar to dollar. We basically don't make up the local effort, and so we would lose that, which the board has done. It was before our time, but we don't want to get into the situation of doing again. So all told, that would be a very healthy and sizable down payment, $6,758,957 between 2020 and 2036. So with that, I just wanted to open up the discussion. I think it's important to note that this is money that ultimately has to be levied against rural taxpayers in order to meet the minimum threshold. That's what we did this year. So what I'd like to do is have this discussion and then have a second part discussion and not take any action on the second part, but it's looking at the potential of a countywide levy potentially. And so with that, if we just talk about this first part first and see what your thoughts are on dedicating that certain amount each year, or if Mark has anything to add.
All right, we're open for discussion on that, so anyone?
I appreciate the idea. I think it's a good way to put our money where our mouth is. What percentage of our income from CF would this be, is the local effort? Is it?
It's kind of hard to say because we release on taxable valuation about 21 million to the total project, and then it varies every year how much we actually release over the increment needed. So it kind of varies. Right now it's around 50%.
50%.
Yep, but you gotta realize CF is part of AGP, or Gelita, Dogwood Trail, whatever. It's a big region that CF is part of.
Mm-hmm.
So when we release it, doesn't mean we release all of it to taxation. It could be other areas of that Powell or Woodbury County.
So if there is, and we discussed this when we passed the taxpayers first resolution, what if there's a big project? So if there's a TIF project the board is supportive of, how does that impact these numbers, or does it?
It'll be less of a release. So it's hard, like the 50-50 policy that the board adopted to help the taxpayers. This year we released whatever increment we released, it all went to taxpayers' relief because we didn't have any additional projects above and beyond the 3 projects we have right now, which is the payback for a project within CF. I guess there's only 2. CF project and the Dogwood Trail AGP project also. As the TIF grows, it'll release, if we don't have any additional projects, which hopefully we do someday for economic growth, but if we don't have any over 4 years, then we can release all the TIF increment valuation.
And this is assuming we don't have any
Additional project.
additional projects?
Yes, but if, like you say, if a big one comes along, there may be a time we can't release any new money out. Because we'll need it to pay off the bonds, whatever.
That 6.7 million assumes all of the money is being, or all of the valuation is being released every year. So that would be the maximum potential. For instance, this year, we would have had 109,512. But we know because not all of that was able to be released because you had to satisfy bonds, the actual number was 48,000. So each year, Dennis and I would have to work to figure out exactly what that value that could be released is.
But I think, if I may, I think it's important to note, because as I tried to wrap my mind around this, this is money that we would have to be levying against rural property taxpayers. It's not a portion of CF Industries' revenue. And the reason I say that is if we don't do this, and we ran into this already this year, if we don't levy the minimum, we lose dollar for dollar from the roads fund, and the state
So-
will scoop it back, essentially.
So we're clarifying here that this is not TIF money you're suggesting to use. You're suggesting the higher taxation from the new formula based off valuations.
Right.
So that potential of that maximum of about 350,000 a year.
Yeah, basically what this schedule represents right now is if we were releasing everything each year, there were no TIF projects and the board didn't approve any, this is what the board would inevitably be levying out there in order to keep up with the state mandated formula in order to meet the minimum local levy. That's what we did this year. And if we do that each of these years, this is how much will be generated. I think it's just a way to say to rural property taxpayers, we are taking that money and instead of, and I understand the equipment, so I'm not trying, but instead of doing X, Y, or Z with that money, it's going to go to gravel and stating very clearly that's our commitment. And I don't know, Mark, if you can answer this. What did the bridge levy generate?
We generated 1.3 million a year out of that special bridge levy
For 5 years.
for 5 years, yes.
So if that's, I'm doing the math here, that's
6.5.
$6.5 million over 5 years.
Correct.
This is around that same total, 6.7 million over 16 years. Is that?
Pretty close.
So I guess one of my arguments would be, I believe that the Board of Supervisors, no matter who's sitting in these 5 chairs, is going to be levying this amount, because if you don't, you'll lose just as much from the state scooping it by not meeting the local minimum effort.
You lose double. You lose what you didn't get in the local, plus you lose road use tax fund dollars.
Yeah. I mean, it's a damning punishment to not do it. So if that's going to be the case, and we spent 6.5 million for 5 years on bridges, this is about 6.5 million over 15 years for gravel, which we've heard time and time and time again is a need.
And I think this is a good goal. It is probably achievable. The only concern that we'd have, and future boards and future engineers are going to have to look at this, is we're seeing our road use tax fund dollars are declining in total dollars. Each year, if you remember the chart that was in the book last year, fiscal year 2017 was the peak on road use tax fund dollars that we're seeing right now. So that fuel tax money is starting to decline. The registration money, which is the Time 21 meeting, is doing some slow growth, but the two of them combined are still lower than what we've had in past years. There may reach a point, depending on the amount of growth you have in valuation and the amount of loss you have in road use tax fund, that you might have to take a look and see if you can still cover all your expenses with inflation. The thing to remember is that the rest of the levy on all the other property outside of CF is estimated very conservatively. This estimate takes into account 1% growth in rural valuation. This year, we saw almost 10% growth in rural valuation, which is one of the reasons that you saw that $350,000 bump. We went up $120 million, and we were 1.1 billion, so that's roughly 10% this year, which is why you had such a large bump. You know, if we keep seeing that, then there would be no problem putting that toward gravel. We'd be able to put more there as well. It's a laudable goal. But again, boards and engineers in the future are going to have to watch it closely. And we hope that trend of fuel tax at least flattens out and doesn't continue the decline, or we'll be looking at another fuel tax increase in 10, 15 years.
So is it fair to say this is based on countywide valuation?
So I think this is based on rural valuation.
Okay.
That's
The-
correct.
the-
Rural only is what's reflected here. So
Okay.
the minimum levy is applied only to rural property. This hasn't taken anything from the cities out of the general basic, which you are eligible to tax.
And I think that that's the other salient point that we need to think about. And here's the problem. This is only rural taxpayers, meaning nobody in an incorporated area. Well, you'd be hard pressed to say that our incorporated areas don't use our secondary roads. I mean, if all the communities out there are somehow getting to Sioux City and eastern Iowa without using secondary roads, I'm not sure how they're doing it. So
We have communities that are only served by secondary roads. Bronson would be the one that jumps off my thoughts. Cushing doesn't
Danbury.
actually touch on Highway 20.
On
Danbury, maybe?
all the
Danbury
commercial,
has State 175 going
Oh,
through
that's
town,
right.
so they
But-
could arguably say that.
Well, how much, if we went countywide, how much could we add? Or can we do a portion of it?
Well, something to remember is that the levy that we use as our potential property tax revenue before we apply the 75% includes that general levy valuation. This year, we could have raised an additional $750,000 at the maximum general levy. So that's the portion of city potential revenue that affects our minimum available right now. So if you take 75% of that 750,000, you're looking at roughly $530,000 would be the portion of the money that essentially the rural taxpayers are covering that general basic levy now in total. That makes.
Is that right? I mean, is that fair?
Well, that's a good question. I would say our communities are getting a very good deal right now. It's been like that for as long as I can go back in records, and about as long as Tish can remember in the records, for our department, only to levy against the rural. Most counties do levy against the general as well. I'll try and have some information for you in 2 weeks that shows what the other 98 counties are levying. When I was at Delaware County, we levied the max from the rural and the general. Lynn County, a number of years ago, in the time period I worked there, levied the max in rural and general. They were raising, at that time, well over $4 million a year in property taxes. They're more similar to Woodbury County than we are, and that didn't create all the heartburn over there that it does here. You know, again, the county board has placed all of the responsibility for roads on rural property taxpayers with none against the majority of which was inside the town of Sloan. Now, some of that was $500,000 of that was federal aid, but that was federal aid we could have applied to a county road out in the rural area as well. The community kicked in $55,000 of it. under our project agreement, but the point is, you have to take care of those communities. They are your roads, just like a road in the rural area. But at this point in time, there is no property tax helping support that.
So they're getting a free ride.
Yes, since 2004. And I think this is one of the reasons that many of the other counties have started taxing general to the max. You know, they don't have a Sioux City in their borders. They have a lot more Bronsons and Danburys and those communities under 500 than we do. Their biggest town might be 4,000 to 5,000 or 4,000 to 6,000. But they are still levying against those 4,000 to 6,000 population towns, just like we did in Delaware County. Manchester was 5,200.
So are you saying that we've lost out dollar for dollar, so to speak, on a portion of money?
We've not lost any money because we've always levied at least 75%.
It's just all been through?
But it's all been on the rural taxpayers' back.
Okay.
And none of it on the communities. And again, I think it's 8 or 9 communities that are under 500 in this county. We're getting prepared to do a project that comes through the center of Hornick. That's going to be about a $2.2 million project when it's done. The portion that will be spent within Hornick is probably approaching $400,000 to $500,000.
But it's paid from folks outside of Hornick, essentially.
Yes. I mean, we're applying federal aid, and then we're applying our farm to market money to cover the balance. And that farm to market money could just as easily take care of L36 south of Correctionville, another road that needs pavement upgrade. There are any number of roads that we need to improve. But again, state code gave those roads to the board's responsibility. Again, when that happened, I think there should have been, it was the ideal time to make a transition and begin taxing those people for the use of the secondary roads. 16 7/8% is not a lot of money coming from the towns compared to what they're paying in other levies that are applied against that general basic.
But all of these figures also take that there'll be no changes in the property tax system down in Des Moines.
That's true too.
Yeah.
Which there's been a lot of talk about changing it. I could take this whole thing and just throw it out and say, okay, we got a new way you have to figure it. And I mean, we've got to do something about the gravel roads. There's no doubt about that. My problem with doing something like this is I never like to preset what a future board is going to do, because I don't think any of us will be here in 2036. That's why
I plan to be retired before then.
I have a problem with us deciding what they're going to do. There used to be a state
Dennis
law
will be
that
here.
you couldn't preset a vote of a future board. But
Well, and just to clarify, this wouldn't be binding.
well, that's, I kept looking for binding or recommendation on it, and I didn't see it.
Yeah, so it would be more akin to a goal, but my worry is if we don't set anything, and we kind of had this discussion with future property tax relief, if we don't at least have a plan in place, and I'm very sure the electorate will hold us accountable if we say, well, you said you were going to dedicate this for property tax relief and this amount for gravel, and you didn't do what you said you were going to do. I think they'll be the ones to hold us accountable. But I do like having at least something in place to hit as a goal. And if a future board says, well, that was a silly idea, then that would be up to them. But at least
Or if they say it isn't achievable
on here,
anymore.
I read it, it says that the board motion to dedicate future secondary road fund. To me, it doesn't say recommend future boards or anything along that line. It says to dedicate it.
Yeah. Well, and I'd be amenable. At first it said resolution, and I withdrew that because that had the sort of binding. To set as a goal, I'd be fine with, as long as there's something in place that when we are asked
You can
about it at
adjust the
forum, we don't
language
say,
of the
well, look
motion.
at that in the future.
And nothing's really binding. A future board could vote to
Sure.
stop it. It's just
Yeah, absolutely.
And this isn't a lose for us as long as we never drop below that 75% from the road department's perspective. We're always going to pump as much money as we can into that gravel road system. It's 960 miles of our 1,360 mile road system. And, we talked about needing $12.5 million in gravel to bring that full 960 up. We're going to be making a proposal here in May or June. It's starting to utilize our Level B ordinance to allow us maybe to target some of those roads that have the traffic, have residences on them, and maybe narrow down the scope of what we improve and allow some of those roads that are just land access roads now to maybe decline, the roads that aren't getting the level of traffic. So
Give us an advance warning of this, right?
no, it'll all be on a map. It'll be an individual discussion where those would be. But it is a tool that we have that was passed back in 1988. It's just never been exercised here in this county. I mean, I'm sure you've driven past other counties and you've seen those signs, minimum maintenance roads, no snow removal. That's the Level B road system. And, you know, many counties went to that because in certain, you know, in the winter months, they're not plowing those roads. We have some of those we don't plow, but we're not giving that same level of warning. We're still graveling them as if they're a regular road. We just don't do snow removal on them. Level B might give us some liability protection and, again, allow us to identify some of those roads that we're going to keep in a land access system at a lower level of maintenance. Then that will allow us to concentrate our dollars on the portion of the system that's carrying heavier traffic. It's an option to look at to allow us to control some cost. You know, we kind of balked at the $25 million cost to fully upgrade. I'd asked the board at that time if they wanted to maybe take a look at a subset of roads that we would improve and other roads we might keep as they are. That's the gist of that proposal we're going to come back to you with this year for discussion. I mean, you can throw it out just like any other proposal, but it is something that may be worth reviewing.
Mr. Chair. Question for Supervisor Taylor. You mentioned property tax relief and gravel. So the taxpayers' first resolution mentioned property tax and economic development. So given this constitutes approximately 50% of what we would get from CF, are we saying in effect that these gravel purchases constitute the entirety of our economic development committed through the CF expansion?
No, for a couple of reasons. The taxpayers' first resolution mandated at least 50% for property tax relief. I don't think it mandated what the other portion was for. If it could be used for economic development, it could be used for anything else, but as long as the one out of the $2. So that would be the first. The second is, I think it's important to remember that these aren't CF Industries revenue dollars. These are dollars that are going to have to be levied against currently rural taxpayers in order to have the minimum growth. So on one hand, you're raising this up because the state essentially mandates that you do. On the other hand, you can be taking, instead of from the right hand, from the left hand to buy down some of those, some of these levies. Am I stating that accurately?
So Dennis, when you said it was half, it's half of the amount, but it's not part of the CF income.
Correct.
Okay.
Because you're got the whole district there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just one major part of the whole district.
And I agree that either way, we're going to come up with this 75%. It doesn't matter. I mean, the fairness of where it comes from is something we obviously need to talk about, but I don't see why anyone would not understand this position, although it is, of course, non-binding and just a recommendation.
I think of it as like on our family budget, we're setting a couple $100 aside every month for college, but then when the van breaks down with 165,000 miles, we sort of suspend that 1 month or two if we have to. So that's the way I'm looking at this. If we get in that situation.
Anyone else? Right.
Yeah, I'm just struggling with the municipalities not paying anything. Dennis, did you say that we could do that in a partial or segmented way? It's, Mark said, what, 16 7/8 cents?
Yes.
Is there a way to do that, to start tapping that at 2 cents or whatever? I don't,
Our current year coming up, we cannot.
okay,
I checked to see if we could, shift, say, 75,000 from rural basic over to general basic. No, we cannot, because you're differentiating between rural levies and countywide levies. For future years, for 2021, or fiscal year 21, we could start doing it.
I'll show you a proposal on that next week. Or I won't be here next week, but in 2 weeks I can give you an idea what that would cost.
well, I guess I'm coming back with Mark talked about the project in Sloan that came from rural money, is that right?
Salix.
Or Salix, okay, so all that money came from rural, and it went into the city, to that town.
Yes.
So it's kind of akin to spending a lot of money in Sioux City or Mobile, where the money comes from the rural and goes to the municipalities. I'm not liking that. If,
We kind of had the same issue with the paramedic coverage, right? Where it was, where are you going to levy countywide or not? And like it or not, we can't differentiate among incorporated areas. And so, as Mark was saying, that there are other counties where it's countywide levy. So I do think it makes sense to have a future discussion, because it's not really on the agenda tonight to take action on that portion, but to have a discussion on what percentage does make sense in the future, because I think you're absolutely right. It does make sense to have the rural taxpayers and unincorporated areas bear the whole brunt of it.
Well, again, I think we should probably understand the formula and the percentages derived by the formula too, because that probably indicates maybe what we should look at from both. Because it's what's the percentages of rural valuations versus incorporated valuations on this formula?
Well, the incorporated valuation is in the area of $3.3 billion. The rural valuation is about $1.2 billion. So the within the cities is almost triple the valuation that's in the rural area.
And then
But the available levy is 1/20th on urban property of what it is on the rural taxpayer. So we're levying $3.03 at maximum on the rural taxpayer. So on that 1.2 billion,
$3.
we can only levy 16 7/8 cents on that 1.1 billion plus the 3.3 billion. Makes up 4.4 billion is roughly what your urban is.
But back to Keith's original question, it really doesn't matter where it's coming from, correct? As long as that minimum local effort is the 75%.
That's correct. You're
So
allowed to
that's
take
where I
that.
think it's not like, well, if it's in the rural, then it's this percentage. If it's in the incorporated, it's this percentage. You just have to make the local minimum
Yeah.
effort.
What I have to do is I have to calculate the maximum that can be achieved by both. You summarize that, you multiply it times 75%, that's our target number.
And how you come up with that is through local option sales tax and taxation.
Yeah, after we get that 75% amount, we subtract our anticipated local option sales tax, and that leaves us a smaller number that we levy on rural or general, depending on what, we've always levied it on only the rural.
So for tonight's purposes, is it fair to say that we're going to dedicate this portion over the next 16 years based on a 75% local match dedicated to gravel, and then at a future date, 2 weeks from now, look at how that may be divvied up differently based on the incorporated versus unincorporated areas?
Yes.
So that's what I make as a motion, is to dedicate, starting in fiscal year 21 to 36, as a goal, I'll amend that, as a goal to dedicate from fiscal years 21 to 36, an amount, help me out with this, Mark,
A maximum of $6.8 million over that time period, or $6.7 million. That's the maximum potential that it could be if 100% of the TIF is released.
solely to gravel on our secondary roads. And then at a future date,
Dedicated
look at
gravel
how-
purchase. Yes, if I could summarize it, it would be to dedicate the identifiable portion of our property tax levies attributable to CF valuation in each of those years, is what we're trying to do here.
Can you say that one more time? To set a goal.
We're setting as a goal to dedicate that amount of money raised by property taxes that's identifiable against CF Industries valuation over the period from 2021 to 2036 to gravel, to increase gravel purchase, I should say. We'll maintain our baseline, which right now is about $1 million a year. So as that grows, you know, eventually from that table, we'll be getting more out of that CF than we'll double it at some point.
And this is assuming this is what we can generate each year. If there's a major project comes through, that takes us down.
And again, Dennis and I will calculate each year what that portion is and be able to show you in the budget where that money shows up.
Because it is the basis of this number at the core, where did we come up with 1% a year? Is it just a good guess?
When I look back in what our history has been prior to CF coming on board, there were years where we had less than 1% growth. There were years where we had 2 to 3% growth. I would rather be conservative on the growth estimate than to project we were going to do 5% every year. History didn't support that. But, yeah, this year was a significant increase.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Mark, what do you say we spend on gravel, this aside, what do we spend on gravel roughly a year?
Roughly $1 million a year.
I guess the only thing that I would like to make sure that this board and future boards safeguard is that if this thing gets approved, we don't say, oh, well, we've got this much money, we don't have to spend it this over here. I don't want to see it gain here and lose there because, oh, we've got some extra room.
And I think that's where you put in there increased gravel purchases. Or
Well, I guess I want to make sure that that's locked in, because I don't want to go backwards on something here and decide that, which
This
would
is all on top of.
probably, well, I get that, but someday, somehow,
And there could be years there could be more, and there could be years could be less. There could be mere 1%, we don't know.
Yeah.
okay.
Well, it's not all binding anyway. Just
Well, and you know, a certain amount of that, if we have 5% growth next year, a portion of that's going to be wages, a portion is going to be inflationary items and the other budget items, and then we'll still stick more into gravel if we can. Every year I struggle to put a little more in there. As you know, we've done budget adjustments at the end of the year where we've gone out and crushed our broken concrete or purchased some extra gravel because we had $1.75 diesel fuel instead of $3 diesel fuel. You know, there are times where we make those adjustments that we can within our administrative engineering, our roadway maintenance, and our general operations area. I can exceed any of those by 10% as long as I can cover them out of one of the other budget areas. So I mean, if we have a good year in roadway operations where we aren't spending a lot on diesel fuel, we pump a little more money into the gravel or, you know, somehow so that we get more money put out there and still do within the limit of our budget. Because nobody knows better than my department how critical this need is. And we try and pull any money we can into that area.
And there is a shadow over this too, the legislature. We don't know what they're gonna do. On the House side, we're just gonna put a restriction on the general fund and rural basic fund. Here we're gonna exempt capital projects, debt service, mental health. Now, what do they define as capital projects? Is graveling the road could potentially be a gravel project, then be exempt. That's just the House version. We still got the Senate to come out, and then they gotta work together. But that's all the shadow over everything we're doing right now.
I went
This is
through.
the intent to try to get something going, what Jeremy's trying to get done.
I went through the freeze from 92 to 94 that was in 3 fiscal years, and that was a difficult time for counties because all your expenses go up and you're locked into what you can do on property taxes. And Woodbury County took it harder, I think, than any of the other 99 because in that year the board had made a decision to spend down their balance and use that as part of their local effort. And they ended up frozen at an artificially low tax levy. And then they had that for the next 3 years. I mean, that was a budget killer for this county.
800,000 a year. So I'm gonna read the motion again, if that's all right. It's to set a goal to dedicate an amount of money raised by property taxes up to $6.7 million, identifiable from CF Industries valuation from FY 2021 to FY 2036 to increase to gravel purchases.
Second.
All right, so motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? Personally, I don't think I'm going to vote for it. I'm good with a verbal commitment and trusting our engineer to, know that's our focus, but that's my personal opinion.
I'm good with a verbal commitment too, but then you're voting against it. So thank Jeremy Taylor for putting it on the agenda.
I mean, as much as I can predict how these envelopes came, called the 140, but, I don't know what a year brings or 2 years or 3 years brings on something like this. And the way I see a gravel road versus maybe a different farm to market route, I mean, if we commit so much to gravel and then we don't have money for something that happens on a paved road, I think it's a mistake, and I think that's where engineer's discretion gives that flexibility, knowing that it's our goal to spend as much as we can on gravel. I just feel making a verbal commitment is good enough, in my opinion. Any other discussion? All right, well, let's do a roll call vote on that one.
Aye.
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 No, so it passes 4-1. You got your stamp out. Item 12, reports on committee meetings, starting with Jeremy.
Had an IJR meeting, and Mark can maybe weigh in. We are to the point of having fairly substantial purpose statement ready to go. The discussion really centered around, ironically, and maybe not coincidentally, how much participation of funding the Siouxland Initiative, Sergeant Bluff, the city of Sioux City, and Woodbury County was going to actually make in this. And each of us said, well, I'm just one guy, and we all have boards. And so part of the discussion was, can the city spend money outside of their jurisdiction on something that's not within the city without annexing? Sergeant Bluff said the same thing. The question was, is the Siouxland Initiative going to pay anything? And I said, well, here's the deal. That only leaves the county. I don't think we're prepared. at this point. So we all, I think, encouraged looking to DOT. That certainly could be a
Yes.
player. Federal Highway, for which maybe if we go to DC, we can sort of start the lobbying process. But I think all of those are things that we want to look at. Who else can play in this before we start the dedication of funds? They need that for the IJR. At least some sort of.
There needs to be some sort of a commitment by the benefactors of the interchange
So
that they
the
will
commitment
commit
that I
to
gave
funding.
is that we will potentially participate at some point.
And one of the ways in which the cities can participate if they can't spend money outside of their boundaries would be dedicating RPA funds for 2 or 3 years, or MPO funds for 2 or 3 years to the interchange. We bring in a little over $2 million a year to the MPO. The initial stage is going to be acquisition of right-of-way, and that's going to be over a $2 million expense to acquire the right-of-way for the footprint of the interchange plus the connecting roads. Then a couple of years of MPO funds dedicated toward construction can go a long way to doing those connecting roads. The actual interchange costs, the work that's being done within the confines of the state highway right-of-way, there's the possibility of getting funds allocated through Congress, through federal highway, and through the state DOTs. So those would be all things that would be worked. First thing is FHWA has to approve a new interchange. If they say no, we don't see justification for it, all the discussion on money is moot at that.
And had Mark also attended a water treatment discussion with Sergeant Bluff, City of Sioux City, and the Chamber, and I don't know, it just seemed like an initial foray into getting the discussion going on McClure Engineering, proposing.
Some kind of cooperative wastewater program.
Which we've already been meeting on that.
Yeah,
Well, with it-
HDR had started some work on that apparently. McClure has some ideas and was wanting to work with the communities and host some kind of a committee that would come to a consensus on where they would be headed with that, I think is a fair way to state it. One of the things I brought up at the end of the meeting to the Chamber and McClure staff is, right now we have a sanitary sewer line that runs to just south of 260th Street, which is the Port Neal Interchange Road. There's sanitary sewer line that runs down there and I believe goes to, I think Mid-American ties into that, if I remember correctly. The end of that line is not too far away from our subdivision in the Browns Lake area that has been suffering with water quality problems, septic systems that don't work. At some point in time, and this is where I think board involvement in at least being part of the discussion of this is important, is that we have some rural areas where we have water quality issues that getting involved in a regional plan may not be a bad idea for the benefit of some of our residents. It's hard for a town the size of Salix to extend their utilities out. And really, Salix and Sioux City are about equidistant from that subdivision.
There are two proposals in the past to offer sewer and water out to those areas, one from Sioux City, while I was on the board, the council there, and one from Salix, and both times Browns Lake residents rejected the idea of that. But I think
somebody else should pay for it as
well. Yeah, and I think there's that potential if it were a regional type facility where now there's not that threat of annexation into a city limit, those kind of people may be more willing. I mean, at the end of the day, I think most people would prefer, the water and sewer being provided, but if they had just put in a new septic tank or put in a new well, they have to dig really far down. They're expensive wells there. So there might be that, well, I just stuck 30 grand in my well, and now I got to pay this.
To me, I was glad Supervisor Taylor asked me to come because I thought I think it's a worthwhile effort to begin to look at these options out there. So,
Are you busy on Friday?
I don't think so right now.
Because I had Josh go through that MOU, and I was going to have it on the agenda this week, but last week's meeting was canceled with the snow. So we're going to meet again on this Friday. I mean, basically, everyone else has already been meeting with an engineer, and McClure came to the table late. Basically, they had already decided on an engineering firm. So moving forward, I mean, we have to decide whether or not we're going to be a part of that. Like I said, we are 5% of the total flow going into the wastewater treatment plant. So, you know, that is something to consider. And even though there's no county residents on there specifically, there are plenty of Woodbury County residents. You know, Sergeant Bluff and Sioux City are all part of that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, the one that was raised. How are these two proposals either dovetailing or competing? You know, so.
I don't have anything.
Okay, and Marty?
I'm here.
Nope,
Roxy?
nope.
Almost everything was snowed out last week. Moving on to citizen concerns.
I have one.
All right.
The County Engineers Association is asking our board members to get involved in a bill that's currently under consideration in the state Senate. It's Senate File 184. And what it's proposing to do is there's a group of folks who are involved with logging. They're wanting to allow 130,000-pound trucks on state and county road systems under a state permit. Typically now, if somebody has an overload, they get a permit for the state for operating on state roads, one from the county for operating on county roads. This would eliminate the county and the county engineer from that discussion. So we could possibly be having the state approving permits to travel on county roads and bridges for bridges that are not built for 130,000-pound loads. We think this bill is fraught with peril number one from the possibility of putting overloads on our bridges. We rate our bridges for 80,000 and 96,000-pound truckloads. That's a lot less than 130,000 pound.
What's the number on that one again?
Senate File 184.
We've gotten a few emails on that from a group.
Yeah, we're asking that that board members contact your senator. I've contacted Senator Carlin and Senator Smith. Senator Smith said she was opposed to the bill. She opposed it in committee. I haven't heard back from Senator Carlin on it. So.
I've got a concern as well. It has to do with legislation. So, Senate Study Bill 1197 is the government behavioral health system. And here's the concern is, other than mention of no money, which means that it's going to be property taxpayers. So potentially you're under the mandate, and I'm not trying to, the income guideline for adults typically in our new region is 150%. This is allowing up to 500%. So for kids, that's with a copay or sliding fee. So a family of 3 earning less than $106,000 a year could be potentially have that benefit extended as far as the child being eligible for behavioral health services. So here's my issue. We just took on over $330,000 just in Woodbury County this next year for mental health services because they added to the core. And I think we're in some ways happy to do that because we see that those are needs. We get it. But if you're now going to take on this much more, and there's no funding attached, all that means is that property taxes on the mental health levy are gonna go up inevitably to pay for it. And so while I'm appreciative that they're looking at property tax relief maybe, at the same time, these unfunded mandates swim in the opposite direction. So it's just something to, I think, monitor and be concerned with as they look to regions to potentially take development. That's all.
Moving on to, another citizen.
In regards to the comm center budget, the city council did approve the improvement request, but they offset it with $70,000 reduction overtime. So when we come to our public hearing, the net result will be a little over 16,000 reduction in the comm center budget. But we'll act on that at the hearing, but they did approve the improvement request for additional employee, but reduce 70,000 on the overtime.
And on that, I'd recommend that we shift that to something like gaming to keep the tax rate the same.
Yeah, I don't think you want to reduce the tax rate anymore than what you've done because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. If we're locked in, because we use next year's tax asking as a base to figure out their whole limitations.
Well, I feel like they've probably talked about that more than actually done it, so
Yep.
probably just the idea stage.
All right, is that the last of the citizen concerns? All right, moving on to board concerns.
I thought that's where we were at, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm sharing.
Matt? Marty? Rocky? I did have one, Jackson Recovery reached out. They're doing a fundraising banquet, asked if the board would be willing to sponsor a table, $300 for their banquet. I don't know if there's a few department heads that want to go in on that or anyone, but I guess email me and let me know, and maybe the county engineering department really wants to fund one.
It's a long way from our mission.
Oh, okay. So anyway, throw that out there. Email me, I guess, if that's an interest for any one of you. And no other concerns. I'll move. I guess we're adjourned.